Well, hello. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Daniel, the Low Budget Outdoorsman, and spring is not quite here yet, but it's around the corner. While I'm not getting out on the water today, I wanted to answer a question on rods and setup. I have been asked that question several times, either on email or the Facebook page, and so asking what rod to use or I recommend is kind of like asking what type of shoes I recommend. It really depends what you're trying to do with them. If you're hiking, that's a completely different type of shoe than if you're running, or if you're working a job, like I am required to have steel toe or safety toe boots at work. And so asking what type of rod you should use is a very broad and generic question unless I know what you're trying to do specifically with that rod. However, the most versatile rod, and I'm going to show you two, one spinning and one casting. The most versatile rod you could probably use, and once again, there is no absolutes because it's really depending on specifically what type of water, what type of vegetation, what depth you fish at. But the most versatile rod, and the one I use probably the most, is a 7'3". Length, once again, has to do with how tall or short you are. If you're a tall person, you might want a little bit longer rod. If you're a child, you might want, a 6'6" rod if you're, 10 years old. But I like a 7'3" medium heavy rod, and I have a higher speed gear ratio reel. I just got a new reel this year. My other high speed reel that I've had for many years finally gave out on me. And I have this spooled with 15-pound fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon has basically the same refractive properties as water, so it's virtually invisible in water. And a 15-pound is a good middle ground between heavy and light. Now, if I'm pitching and working just really thick stuff, I'll have to use a heavy rod with a braid on it. But you can do some pitching, you can do some flipping around lighter vegetation or sporadic vegetation, or in some things where you'll be able to get them out with a 15-pound line. It also allows you to throw a little bit lighter jig, as does it allow you to use fish a worm. If you're fishing a lipless crankbait over some vegetation, I like a heavier, quicker action rod to be able to rip that lipless out of the vegetation to keep the vegetation off of the hooks with a quick pop. And so a 7'3" medium heavy with a high speed gear ratio reel, that's 7 on up to 8, and then they've got some even really high speed reels. And so that allows me, the 7'3" allows me enough distance if I'm throwing a lipless to be able to get out there and cast it a little bit further distance than if I had a real short rod. And also it allows me to have a little bit better accurate casts, or allows me some accurate pitches when I'm pitching into brush. I missed my spot 2 times in a row there, but the high speed reel also allows me to get the lure back to me quick. And we did it. 3rd time's a charm. But the high speed reel really allows me to get it back quickly. Same thing if I have to whip a cast out farther and I just really miss my spot, or if I'm fishing a lipless and I see some busting over there, that high speed reel allows me to get it back much quicker than a low speed reel. So I like the high speed reel. It's a versatile. The only thing it is if you're fishing, have to reel it in slow, then you really have to focus on slowing down. So 7'3", medium heavy with a fast action tip, which means it loads up fast, 15-pound fluorocarbon, and a high speed reel is probably the most versatile bass rod that you can have, the bass setup you can have. You can fish smaller jigs, you can fish worms, you can fish flukes, you can fish lipless crankbaits, you can fish a jerkbait, although I like a shorter rod for a jerkbait, but it's a good jerkbait setup if you're fishing a deep diving jerkbait. You can fish even some swim baits on it, but the rod's going to load up a little too quick, so you're going to really have to slow down that hook set and make sure you give them a little bit of line and let them eat it if you're fishing a swim bait on this setup. And so there's a lot of versatility in this rod. So if you're looking for a bait casting setup and you can't afford, and I can't afford them all at once, I try to maybe get one reel every other year and one rod every year, so I don't have a whole bunch of fishing gear myself because I am low budget. But a 7'3" medium heavy 15-pound fluorocarbon and a high-speed reel is just a invaluable tool and versatile tool when bass fishing. Now on to the spinning reel. Spinning reel is what most people, myself included, started out with. When we're young, they're easier to cast. They don't necessarily backlash like a casting reel does. And this is the spinning reel that I use, the spinning setup I use the most. And what you can't do with a medium heavy 15-pound fluorocarbon bait cast setup is you can't really finesse fish. Here I have a light little shaky head with a little crawfish on there just for demonstration because it was sitting in the boat, so I put it on. But I'll fish with either 6 or 8 pound primarily, Nanofill or braid, and then if I'm fishing for real, then I will have a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader on here. This allows me 7-foot medium on a spinning reel, size 30, allows me to have quite a bit of line on there. Fast action, it loads up quick towards the tip. It doesn't bend down in here. If you have a fast rod, it will bend up here, it'll load up here at the tip. If you have a moderate, it'll load up more in here. If you have a slow, which there's not too many slows, it'll load up down here. A slow loading rod is good for a swim bait or something like that. Oftentimes a crankbait. But for finesse fishing, I like to feel everything. And when I'm dragging this along the ground, I like to be able to feel all of what it's doing. I like to feel if it's going up or down. I like to feel the sensitivity coming through the line. So I want a line that does not stretch, because when a line stretches, it loses sensitivity. So I have a 6-pound on now, and I'll either use 6-pound or 8-pound Nanofill, which is a Berkley brand, I think. Basically a braid type line. And if I'm fishing in super clear water, then I will put a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader on there. But this line is very sensitive, and it allows me to feel those slow lethargic bites. It allows me to feel the bottom, whether I'm on shell bed or gravel, whether I'm got into some mud. It just allows me to feel a whole lot of the bottom, what's down there, and it allows me to feel those small little slow bites when they just kind of pick it up and start to move off with it. The other reason on a finesse spinning setup you want lighter line is the thicker the diameter of the line, the heavier the line, the less action it's going to impart to your presentation. So I like a smaller, lighter line. But once again, I can't, because this is a light line, I can't throw this into some really heavy thick stuff and wrench a bass out. Doesn't mean you can't fish it around some thick stuff, but you can't just wrench them out of there. You have to let them play out a little bit more. And so that eliminates some of the areas that you can fish this. But at the same time, it is just as invaluable in that style of fishing as this 7'3" with a 15-pound fluorocarbon is for throwing a worm or light jig or lipless crankbait. Because you will never get the action, the distance on the casting, if you tied this presentation onto this setup. One thing I was going to show you, just as I was pitching that and reeling in fairly quickly, you can also pitch a spinning reel just like that, and that's a very handy cast, because even if you're fishing from the bank, if you don't have a boat, if the spinning reel is your first setup that you ever own, it's good to learn that pitch cast, because sometimes you'll be fishing, say you're fishing up against the bank and you got some brush and branches and trees right there. Well, you're not going to be able to wind up and cast. You're going to get hung up in the branches. but you still want to be able to cast out there into the river or over the creek or across the creek. You can still pitch it out there with an underhand cast and get it quite a ways out there without having to wind up and cast very far. See, I just threw it, I don't know what that is, 30 yards right over top. I got that little bucket out there. And so this is a great little cast, underhand cast, pitch cast to learn how to do with a spinning reel, and it will greatly benefit you in not only short casts for pitching, but for when you can't wind up and just haul off and throw your lure out across the creek or the river or the lake because of the vegetation that's up against the bank. You can use that pitch motion. It's just a motion like this. You're holding it just like you would to cast it. Don't grab the hook, grab the little appendages below the hook. Well, I got talking and drug the tip. That's not how you do it. So you grab below the hook on the appendages just like you're going to pitch and throw it out there like that. And it won't be as accurate as the casting reel, because the casting reel you can with your thumb slow down the rate it's going out, and that will also pull it left or right depending on how you move your rod tip. This, you can stop it, but you can't really slow it. So I can reach up and stop it if I want. I can reach up and stop it, but I can't slow it down very effectively or very precisely. So there you have my two most used rod and reel setups for bass fishing. A 7-foot medium spinning, 7-foot medium spinning rod with a light line, 6 or 8 pound Nanofill, and a size 30 reel. Allows me to finesse fish and also have enough backbone if I want to catch some bigger fish. I just have to play them out with the line. And then a 7'3" medium heavy casting reel with 15 pound fluorocarbon and a high speed gear ratio reel. If you can only have one of these, if you're just starting out and you can only have one reel to fish with and one rod to fish with, obviously the spinning reel is the easiest to learn. But if you're going to get into it, at some point you're going to need to learn a casting reel. And so I really think it depends on what type of fishing you're going to do. If you're up north and you're primarily, or out west maybe, and you're fishing clear lakes with finesse presentations for spotted bass or smallmouth bass, then by all means, the one rod you will probably use the most would be a spinning setup with a finesse line on it. If you're fishing in any of the south where you have reservoir systems with lay down logs and buckbrush and vegetation and lily pads, now you're not going to get in the really thick stuff with this setup, but you can get on the edge of some lily pads or in buckbrush where they don't have a lot of depth to them, where they can't get really down deep and just wrap you up. You can fish this setup in all of those. So if I was going to go with one setup where I live in Tennessee, it would probably be this setup, because almost at any point in the year I could catch bass using this setup. That setup I would only catch bass, probably I would use a lot more in either the summer or in the winter when I'm fishing shaky heads, slower presentations, just dragging something along the bottom. But if that presentation, a drop shot presentation or a shaky head presentation, is your go-to presentation for what you're fishing for, then the spinning reel with that line setup and that reel size is probably your best option. And I'll see you on the next one. Hopefully I'll be fishing. I'm Daniel, the Low Budget Outdoorsman. God bless.